NEWSLINE with Faraz, Shauketaly.
And very good evening to you. This is NEWSLINE Live, and we're broadcasting from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo. And our guest today is a diplomat with some form of a record, which hasn't really been emulated too often. And that is that this particular diplomat has represented two sovereign states and also the world's largest international organization. We're talking, of course, none other than Dr. Palitha Kohana. Very good evening to you.
Good evening to you.
And so you've been a diplomat for the Australian government?
For 10 years, yeah.
For 10 years.
That was my first paying job.
Okay. And then thereafter you came to Sri Lanka, or you went to the UN?
No, I was assigned to the UN on leave from the Australian Foreign Service.
Right.
I stayed there for 10 years also. During that period, I resigned from the Australian service and stayed on at the UN.
Right.
After that, in early 2006, the newly elected president of Sri Lanka, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, invited me to come back to Sri Lanka, and I obliged.
So you came back to the land of your birth to represent this country.
Yeah.
And now we are told that you've been nominated to be our ambassador in China.
That's correct. Yeah.
And when do you think you'll be going there?
At the moment, you know that it's not easy to fly between countries.
Oh, yes.
So I will probably have to wait till airlines resume services.
Okay. Now then, it's almost like you're going to have your work cut out. The reason I'm saying that is that we had President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who went to India soon after his election, and he said that Sri Lanka will go with the India first sort of policy. And Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa was asked by the Indian media about China, and he said, yes, well, they're our friends too, and we'll do that. Then we have this whole business about the MCC. It's a bit of a yo-yo. There's no clear cut. If they don't need it, then why have a cabinet committee to look at it? So it appears that that bit is going to be given to the Americans. So I'm wondering, Ambassador Kohana, who is it there who's going to say Sri Lanka first and put the interests of Sri Lanka first?
I think both the statements made by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and the Prime Minister are accurate.
Right.
President Rajapaksa said that we will work with India, and it's natural. They are our closest neighbor and the strongest inspiration culturally, religion-wise, etc. on Sri Lanka. Sri Lankans have to treat India as a very important partner and a neighbor. And then, of course, we need to work with China as well. China is the second biggest economy in the world. Their resources are fairly extensive, financial resources, and Sri Lanka needs financial assistance to grow rapidly. Because at the moment, our economy needs a boost, and then we need to go to countries that can help us with that. Having said that, it's very important to remember, and this has been stated very clearly in President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's policy statement, the vision of prosperity, Saubhagya Datma, that Sri Lanka will be his priority. Sri Lanka will be the country that will be the focus of the government's attention and the president's attention. And of course, as an employee of the government or future employee of the government, that will be my focus. Sri Lanka will be our priority, and it is Sri Lanka's interest, Sri Lanka's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity that we will be working to protect.
There is sort of concern that Sri Lanka has been led into a debt trap by China. How do you react?
Who said that? I mean, of course, there's a lot of Western commentary on that, some Indian commentary also, but it is to be remembered that it's only about 10% of our debt is owed to China. The biggest share of our debt is owed to Wall Street, and the rest to international institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, etc. So in the circumstances, I think it's a bit rich for anyone to say that Sri Lanka owes too much to China. China, when we needed assistance, especially after the internal conflict was concluded in 2009 and we needed to develop rapidly, we turned to all our traditional friends and traditional lenders who whistled into the wind and turned the other way. We had to go to China, and China was ready and willing to help us out.
Does that mean that it is justifiable to give China a 99-year lease on one of our...
I think we are mixing too many things here. In 2009, when the Rajapaksa administration went to China, there was no thought of giving anything to China of that nature. We borrowed money and we were ready to repay the money that was lent to us. In 2015, we had a change of administration who, sad to say, could not manage our economy in a reasonable manner. For them, the solution for repaying what we owed was to hive off a bit of real estate from here or a bit of real estate from there and sort out the problem. I don't think the Rajapaksa administration would have done that.
And Ambassador, is that's a strategic interest? President Gotabaya has been on record as saying that he'd look into perhaps renegotiating. Is that within your remit now? Or
at this stage, I don't know.
Yeah.
But when you have good relations with a country, anything is possible. In 2015, we went out our way to upset China, to annoy China, because we had hoped at the time that we would get bags of dollars from elsewhere. We didn't get that. So we were left in high and dry. We were left in the lurch. I don't think the Rajapaksa administration would consider that as an option of selling or leasing national real estate, national crown jewels to anybody in order to make the balanced accounts.
Will there be a possibility of renegotiating the terms?
I think everything is within the realms of possibility, because if you have good relations with a country, especially an Asian country, you know that in Asia, contracts can be renegotiated depending on the circumstances. The whole concept of a contract in East Asia is different from the concept of a contract in the West. When your partner is in difficulties, the lender or the other party will look into the circumstances and consider what else can be done to help your friend out or your relative out. So we need to keep all the possibilities, all the options open, and I think that's what the Rajapaksa administration will do.
The election of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and then the parliamentary victory of the party that nominated him, the SLPP, will now almost invariably mean that the forces out in the West will now once more start asking about the issues of accountability, reconciliation, alleged war crimes, and so on. How prepared are you to address all these issues?
I don't think the countries of the East, like China or Japan, have ever demanded that sort of accountability from Sri Lanka. They've understood Sri Lanka's position. It is for us now as a country to prepare our case and present it to the international community. What we did in 2009 was rid the country of a terrorist organization which was considered to be invincible. And it was a terrorist organization that created absolute mayhem in this country. And the administration at the time, Mahinda Rajapaksa's administration, got rid of that scourge. I don't think any country should be taken before a tribunal for doing what it did. We got rid of a terrible scourge. The people of this country, the vast majority of them, are happy with the result. So in the circumstances, I think it's a little rich for anyone to say, or unfair for anyone to say what was done was not necessary.
Now then, with the world economy as it is, thanks to the pandemic, surely the Sri Lanka's relationship cannot only primarily depend on China in terms of finding funds for development and sustaining our economy and so on. How will this sort of pro-China leaning reflect with the relationship with the United States and with Europe and so on?
I think the expression that you used just now, pro-China, is perhaps a little exaggerated.
Right.
The government has stated clearly that it wants good relations with everyone, with the West, with India, with China. And I believe that's what the government's objective is, to have good relations with everyone. We will not play favorites. I don't think that's what the government wants to do, because in the long run, when you play favorites, you suffer. And that is not the goal of the government. The government wants to maintain good relations with the West, with China, with India, and everybody else.
Thank you, Dr. Palitha Kohana, and the Ambassador Designate to China. And on that note, we'll go for a short break, and we'll see you on the other side of that. Don't go away. After all, this is Newsline Live.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz, Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. We're in conversation with the Ambassador Designate to China, Dr. Palitha Kohana, who's here with me here. Now then, Dr. Kohana, I want to ask you one other China-centric question. The United States announced various sanctions against some Chinese companies, including one that is sort of a lead partner in the Colombo Port City project. How will this impact on that project?
I assume that, I'm not familiar with the details, but I assume the project will go ahead. The sanctions, I believe, are targeted on individuals. And as to how that will impact on the project is not certain at this stage. The project, the landfill part of the project is almost complete. So what remains is for investors to come and use that landfill. I'm only guessing at this stage. I don't think the Chinese company will be responsible for the constructions on that, like the buildings, the marina, etc. I'm only guessing. In the circumstances, the individuals involved will be subject to the sanctions, American sanctions, which are also extraterritorial. I mean, there are lots of questions relating to the extension of the jurisdiction of a country in this manner to affect extraterritorial activities or individuals. I think it's a murky area, and I don't think we need to be worried too much about what we will do with the Colombo port city, because at this stage we have invited investors from around the world, whether they're Chinese or otherwise, Americans even, to come and make use of this opportunity.
And thank you for your questions. One of these, let me take one. Do you think Sri Lanka is still bound by the 1987 Rajiv JRJ Accord and the full implementation of the 13th Amendment?
The Rajiv JR Accord or Indo-Lanka Accord was an international agreement. Therefore, prima facie, it is binding on the two parties. But there is also a rule at international law which requires both parties to discharge their obligations. As to whether the Indian party discharged its part of the obligation is not very clear, because the accord states categorically that the Indian party should have disarmed the LTT and brought it into the democratic mainstream. This never happened. So why should only Sri Lanka be bound by its commitments? Because after all, an international treaty has commitments and obligations on the parties involved, in this case two parties. It's not only Sri Lanka that is bound by those obligations, India was bound as well. But I don't think India succeeded in disarming the LTTE or bringing them into the political mainstream.
And another question is, does China, given the global economic problems, does China have enough willpower and commitment and money to help Sri Lanka develop?
I don't know. That's a question that one should pose to the Chinese. But objectively, China has the biggest reserves in the world, something around $3 trillion. And it's also got this BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and they have committed themselves to invest $3 to $4 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars in the Belt and Road Initiative. Already they have disbursed significant amounts, going into billions in various countries in the Belt and Road region. So in the circumstances, I think China is forging ahead, and I doubt very much whether China at this stage is going to pull back because of various criticism. China has a right to do what it's doing. Why should China be criticized? Because it's spreading its largesse around the world, especially around the developing world.
The Maldivian government are not, the current Maldivian government, not terribly happy with China. And they too allude to this debt trap.
I think if a country assesses that, determines that the Chinese assistance or Chinese money is going to cause it a problem, it's its sovereign right not to get involved in that, in borrowing that money. And I have no problem with that. Every country has a sovereign right to either accept money from China or not accept. China is offering it. So I don't think I will read too much into that. Not only the Maldivian government, the Malaysian government also renegotiated an agreement with Chinese lenders.
Here we go. How could Dr. Kohana say Sri Lanka will not play favorite to any single country, because the country which gives the most assistance will be the most influential and will be automatically favored? Nothing is given for free.
I agree, but it's for us as a sovereign state to decide what we take and how we manage it. And I think it's very important to remember, as a sovereign state, Sri Lanka should manage whatever that is given in a way that is consistent with its independence, its sovereignty, and its territorial integrity.
A question that is posed and written about and so on all over the place is this is a reference to the national question. So what of the national question?
I would like to know what this national question is for us.
I think what
I think this is way outside my mandate, answering this question. But
well, it's a question of accountability about the claims, the allegations of war crimes, and so on, and especially this more really is this question of an apparent division between the majority and some of the minorities, and the reconciliation that must follow.
Let's take one step at a time. I have never been convinced that this accountability question has been properly explained or properly framed. I do not think that simply because a country dealt with the terrorist issue and eliminated that terrorist problem should be brought before the court of world opinion to answer a question relating to accountability. We have had wars before this. We have had terrorist problems before this elsewhere in the world. In fact, the West invaded Iraq in order to forestall the possibility of Saddam Hussein supporting terrorism. They invaded Afghanistan, because it was thought that terrorism originated in that country. No other country which eliminated terrorism before Sri Lanka has been asked to account for that. Why should Sri Lanka be the first in this case? I think it's grossly unfair, and if infractions did occur, the first thing would be to identify the infractions, provide the evidence, and like in every other case, whether it's the UK or the US, let Sri Lanka deal with those infractions. But here we have the court of world opinion being marshaled to get Sri Lanka to respond to this allegation. And of course, at this stage, it remains an allegation, nothing more than that. We haven't seen much by way of verifiable evidence that will stand up in a court of law. It's all propaganda at this stage. So are we going to respond to this in a serious manner, or just dismiss it as simple propaganda used to denigrate this country and the security forces that achieved such a mammoth success dealing with a terrorist organization that at one stage was considered to be invincible?
Well, all the very best to you in China, to Mr. Morgoda in India, and Mr. Ravinath Arisinghe in the United States. Because Sri Lanka will be, our foreign policy will be counting on the successes of you three gentlemen, especially you three gentlemen. And good luck with all that, and to keep us informed and keep us in the loop.
Thank you, Faraz. Thank you for this opportunity.
It's a wonderful pleasure. And that's the way it was on NEWSLINE Live. We were in conversation with Dr. Palitha Kohana, the next ambassador from Sri Lanka to China. And on that note, take care, good night, and God bless.